Today, we're taking on something absolutely huge. On the 4th of July 2026, the United States is going to celebrate its 250th anniversary as an independent nation. But the history of the land that actually birthed America, that dates back much, much further. We're going to trace this entire fascinating journey from its ancient origins through centuries of colonization, revolution, and expansion, all the way right up to the modern day. So let's dive right in. At the very heart of this history is a foundational promise. It's this powerful idea that anyone can cast off their past and claim life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, before this concept could even be conceived, a tremendous amount of conflict, settlement, and struggle had to unfold. But it's this exact promise that really anchors the nation we're exploring today.
And honestly, that leads us to our ultimate framing question. How exactly did an incredible myriad of indigenous tribes, scattered across this vast continent, undergo colonization, a revolution, a brutal civil war, and unimaginable disasters, only to eventually emerge as the world's preeminent superpower? It's a staggering, complex narrative, and we're going to unpack exactly how it happened. Let's hit our first major chapter.
Section 1. Before the Republic. Ancient civilizations to colonial empires. So long before the Declaration of Independence was ever a thought, this immense landmass was already thriving. The sheer scale of early American history is pretty mind-blowing. We're talking 15 to 20,000 years ago when hunter-gatherers first crossed a Siberian land bridge into the Americas. Indigenous societies totally flourished here. Take the incredible Mississippian city of Cahokia, for example. By 1100 AD, it grew to 20,000 people, which was actually larger than a lot of European cities at the time. Then, in 1492, Columbus makes landfall, kicking off massive waves of European colonization. The English eventually set up Jamestown in 1607. And then, crucially, in 1619, a vessel named the White Lion sold the first documented enslaved Africans in English North America. That moment planted the seeds of an institution that would literally shape the nation for over 200 years.
Fast forward a bit to 1750. By this point, those 13 British colonies were absolutely exploding in population, pushing past 1 million people. They were pulling in settlers from all over Europe, alongside this ever-increasing number of enslaved Africans. And with all that rapid overcrowding, the colonists started pushing westward into the highly fertile Ohio River Valley. The problem? That land was already claimed by New France. And, well, when competing empires don't have clear boundaries, conflict is absolutely inevitable.
Section 2. Revolution and Independence, the birth of a new nation. That colonial frustration, it boiled right over into an outright rebellion that shocked the world. It was a rapid, dramatic escalation. First, the British successfully drive out the French, but they're left with this enormous war debt. Their brilliant solution? Tax the American colonies to pay for it. Well, the colonists immediately react with constitutional outrage. They had zero representation in Parliament, which led to massive boycotts and famous events like the Boston Tea Party. Finally, in April 1775, a tense standoff at Lexington leads to the proverbial shot heard round the world. A dispute over finances had just exploded into an armed revolution. Now, you might be wondering how a poorly equipped militia managed to outmaneuver a global empire. Well, after signing the Declaration of Independence on July 4, 1776, the Continental Army had to rapidly professionalize. The brilliant victory at Saratoga in 1777 was the real linchpin here. It convinced France to formally enter the war as a secret ally. By 1781, those allied American and French forces trapped the British at Yorktown, forcing a total surrender after a grueling 3-week siege. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris officially recognized U.S. independence, and by 1788, the United States Constitution was ratified. Just like that, a brand new republic was born. But of course, they weren't going to just stop at the Mississippi River. In 1803, President Thomas Jefferson orchestrated this massive deal, the Louisiana Purchase from France. This single event expanded the country's borders all the way out to the Rocky Mountains. Jefferson then sent Lewis and Clark to go map it out, which completely fueled the young nation's wild aspirations to eventually stretch from coast to coast. Section 3. Expansion and Fracture, Manifest Destiny and the Civil War. All that incredible growth came with a truly heavy cost. Heading into the 19th century, this relentless drive westward exposed a deep, terrifying fracture in the country. The nation was dividing along a very clear line. On one side, you've got the northern states, rapidly industrializing, affluent, and choosing to be free of slavery. On the flip side, the southern states were agricultural, poor, and deeply, deeply dependent on a plantation economy driven by slave-produced cotton. So as the U.S. expanded west, every single new territory forced a bitter political battle. Would this new state allow slavery or not? This underlying tension was literally tearing the fabric of the Union apart.
And the dark reality of this manifest destiny was immense human displacement and enslavement. The entire engine of the American economy relied on over 2 million enslaved people by 1830. That very same year, the Indian Removal Act authorized the coercive, forced expulsion of countless Native American tribes to present-day Oklahoma. Plus, following the Mexican-American War, the 1848 Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo transferred over 500,000 square miles of Mexican territory straight to the U.S. So the country was getting exponentially larger and wealthier, for sure, but the human toll was just tragic and immense.
600,000. That is the staggering number of American lives lost when the North-South divide over slavery finally ruptured into the American Civil War in 1861. After Abraham Lincoln was elected on a mandate to prevent the expansion of slavery, Southern states seceded to form the Confederacy. The resulting 4 years saw industrialized warfare produce casualties on an absolutely unimaginable scale.
Following the Union's victory, and of course the tragic assassination of Lincoln, the country began the long process of Reconstruction. The 13th Amendment formally abolished slavery, which was monumental, but true equality remained tragically out of reach. Once federal troops withdrew, Southern states rapidly constructed the Jim Crow system. Through poll taxes, literacy tests, and outright terror, racial segregation was aggressively enforced for the better part of a century.
Section 4. Industry and World Wars, the emergence of a global power.
So, moving past the Civil War, transcontinental railroads quickly connected the coasts, and the U.S. transitioned into an absolute industrial powerhouse. We're talking rapid resource extraction and sprawling cities. But, that frenzied economic growth wasn't exactly stable. After the booming prosperity of the 1920s, rampant speculation triggered the devastating Wall Street crash of 1929. This plunged the entire nation into the Great Depression, leaving a staggering 25% of the nation completely unemployed by 1933, right at the same time massive dust storms were devastating the agricultural Great Plains.
To combat this total economic collapse, President Franklin Roosevelt won a landslide election and launched his famous New Deal in 1932. This marked an unprecedented level of government intervention in American history. By initiating these massive, government-sponsored infrastructure projects, like building out the road system and constructing the Hoover Dam, the government stepped in to provide much-needed jobs to try and stabilize the struggling economy.
Ultimately, what truly pulled the economy out of the Depression was global conflict. America's trajectory shifted wildly. They entered the First World War in 1917, which tipped the scales for the Allies. Then, abandoning a period of strict isolationism after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941, the U.S. entered the Second World War. The American economy was entirely revitalized into the greatest war machine in history. By spring 1945, Nazi Germany was defeated, and to avoid a ground invasion of Japan, the U.S. controversially deployed a secret nuclear weapon, dropping atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 to end the war.
Section 5. Cold War and Civil Rights. Ideological battles at home and abroad.
The nation that emerged from World War II was fundamentally different. The U.S. now stood as one of two major global superpowers. On the global stage, we see this intense binary tension that dictated foreign policy for decades. On one hand, you have the democratic West, led by the U.S., pouring billions into Europe via the Marshall Plan and forming NATO to contain communism. On the other hand, the communist East, headed by the USSR, was competing fiercely. And this wasn't just ideological talk, it manifested in brutal proxy wars in Korea and Vietnam. Symbolically, it fueled the space race, which culminated in the American Apollo 11 moon landing.
But look, while America was fighting for democracy abroad, it was finally forced to confront its own deep systemic inequalities right at home. Despite the Civil War ending a century prior, brutal segregation persisted. In 1955, Rosa Parks' famous bus protest ignited a massive civil rights movement, spearheaded by leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. This movement systematically exposed the violent nature of segregation and effectively forced the government to act. The monumental Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 were passed, making huge legislative leaps toward that true American ideal of liberty for all.
Section 6. The modern superpower, from the fall of the wall to today. By the late 1980s, relations with the Soviet Union actually began to thaw, culminating in the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the complete collapse of the USSR shortly after. Suddenly, the United States was left as the undisputed, unchallenged superpower on the world stage. Throughout the 1990s, America enjoyed this triumphalist confidence in liberal democracy and free market capitalism. However, that entire status quo was completely shattered on September 11th.
Those horrific attacks prompted the United States to launch a massive, two-decade war on terror, resulting in the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq. Global terrorism fundamentally reshaped the nation's modern foreign policy for the next 20 years.
Today, the United States stands as a nation of some 340 million people, irreversibly shaped by centuries of migration, colonization, revolution, and fracture. And so we end on this really profound question. After almost 250 years, how will that original American idea, that anyone can cast off tyranny and claim life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, shape its next chapter? It's a complex legacy for sure, and the history is literally still being written. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I encourage you to keep questioning and keep learning. See you next time.